We see dozens, if not hundreds of them every single day. Don't even realize what we see. On our way to work, they line our ditches and our roads. They're in our parks. They're in our waterways and our reservoirs. They're in our agricultural fields and our pastures. Sometimes they're even inside of our houses. I'm talking about invasive species. Species that have been taken from their native range and introduced into a different area, much like this park right here. First, we need to define the term invasive. There are species that have been introduced into different areas but aren't considered invasive. Those terms can include exotic species, introduced, non-indigenous, non-native, and then there's invasive species. All of those describe a species that has been taken from its native range and introduced into another area. Invasive species, however, cause harm. They cause harm to the ecology of the new area, meaning that they outcompete native species, they may prey on the native species, it may be a herbivore, may be a new parasite. It just causes harm to the native ecosystem. They cause harm to the economy, meaning there's a lot of money being involved in the eradication, the control, or the prevention of these species. And lastly, they may cause harm to human health. A prime example is the introduced tiger mosquito that can carry Zika, Ebola, and malaria. And most invasive species cause harm to 2, if not 3 of those things. Now there are upwards of 50,000 non-native introduced species in North America. But of that 50,000, only about 5,000 are considered invasive. Now some characteristics that give invasive species the upper hand in their new introduced range: they grow up very fast. They have a very fast growth and development stage, usually becoming sexually mature within their first or second year of life. When they do become sexually mature, they produce a lot of offspring and can often reproduce several times a year, whereas a lot of native species have one reproductive cycle a year. They're very adaptable. They can be introduced in a wide range of habitats and be okay. And they're usually a generalist, which means that if it's an animal species, they're not too picky about what they eat. Now within their native range, these species have natural balances, and they're in that natural order of things in the ecosystem. There is a balance to an ecosystem. It might be a predator keeping them in balance. It might be a parasite or a disease, or maybe the herbivores in those areas have, adapted to eat them. But when they are introduced in a new area and that predator is missing, those herbivores that can eat the plant, that disease, those parasites that keep them in check are missing, and with all those characteristics I said before, they can quickly overtake the new ecosystem and become, a big part of the biomass of that new ecosystem. And when these species are introduced into these new areas, the native wildlife, to be blunt about it, are naive. They have adapted and evolved over thousands of years without these species around, and now all of a sudden there's a new species here and they don't know what to do about it. They don't know whether to eat it, to run from it, it might carry a parasite to them or a disease to them. So that's why native species are usually outcompeted by these introduced species. They're just naive to them. So just how do these species get introduced into North America? Well, ballast tanks are a huge thing. They bring in water from areas across the ocean, and they empty out their ballast tanks here in the United States, and inside that water, well, there could be eggs, there could be small fish, there could be mussels, there could be, all these different species now into our waters. Contaminated agricultural grain has in the past introduced a lot of different species. Sometimes they're on purpose. We introduced some silver and grass carp to clean sewage lagoons and aquaculture lagoons and to eat the cyanobacteria and the moss in there. Well, they eventually escaped, and well, that was on accident. The pet trade has become a huge issue. So a lot of people just get tired of taking care of their lionfish or their python, and they think they're doing the animal a favor by releasing it into the wild. It'll live a good life. In all honesty, now they have, predators and disease and stuff like that, where they were once captive and now they're in the wild. But in rare occasions, they do become established, and now everybody's heard of the Burmese python down in Florida. Ornamental plants have come around the entire world into people's yards because they are aesthetically pleasing. They are pretty. So people wanted them in their yards. Well, a lot of those became very invasive. Shipping containers have also introduced several different species of wood borer. Wood shipping crates have the eggs inside of them, or the larvae, and when they're discarded, well, the larvae get out, and lo and behold, we get those borers, we get those beetles. And with travel being such a dominant part of our lifestyle nowadays, of our human lifestyle, invasive species have tagged along. Think about, hiking out in a park. You collect seeds in your socks, and then you go to a different park, and those seeds drop off, and those plants are now germinating in a different park. That's how a lot of species are introduced on accident. Mussels, zebra mussels, quagga mussels have attached themselves to the undersides of boats. Those boats go to a different lake. That's how they spread. Firewood distribution. We sell firewood across the state, and emerald ash borer was in there. Being in education, I know that education can be a huge tool for conservation and biodiversity loss. Invasive species isn't a huge topic that's covered by the big time media, social media. There's only a few people covering it. It's just not a well-known issue. But in retrospect, invasive species are arguably the second cause of biodiversity loss throughout the entire world, coming in second to habitat loss and degradation. So this is an issue that needs more people to know about it, and that's why we developed Invasive Brews, to spread awareness of these invasive species all throughout North America and their effects on local economies, their ecology, and eventually sometimes human health. With more eyes on this situation, the more funding people can get to go out and help control these species. And learning and studying these species and getting firsthand accounts of the efforts that are being put into their control and eradication isn't the only thing that I'm excited for this project. I get to go to areas that I probably would never, get to go to or even plan on going to unless I was doing this. With that, I get to go to breweries that I've never been to before, and try craft beers that I probably have never even heard of. Some of my best friends are in the brewing business, and they have such a unique story about them and their background and their business that they deserve to be showcased. And I know for a fact that all the brewers out there, the small business owners out there, have their own unique stories that need to be showcased. So I'm excited to bring apart two of my passions, small business and invasive ecology. So join me on future episodes where I'm going to talk to different people and get the first-hand accounts of the control efforts and the eradication efforts of invasive species. And I'm going to get to try different breweries and talk to the owners and the managers and the brewers alike to get their story and get their story out there to as many people as I can. So until then, stay tuned for upcoming episodes. I know I got some good ones planned, but until then, plant native and drink local.